Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds by nerds, I'm Nerdarchy Dave, and today I'm joined by James Kerr. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Dave. I'm James Kerr of Radio James Games, and I'm here to flagrantly plug my Kickstarter.
Nice. We get a lot of those, and we appreciate it. Also, it gives us different perspectives. We get to introduce new things to our audience, and I get to check out new things. So if you'd be so kind to kind of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you before we get started.
Sure. My spiel is that I'm a trade magazine publisher by day. I've been in the publishing industry for about 7 years, and I'm a tabletop role-playing game publisher by night. And I've been tabletop role-playing in a paid capacity for about 4 years. Most of my work has been with Pendelhaven Press, which is in Quebec, so it's Canadian, and I'm Canadian. They're good people. It was a good arrangement. They publish the Fate of the Norn system. I've done 6 books for them. I think 6, my last count. And the last book I did a lot for. I was the kind of the editor. I was the project manager for the Kickstarter, and I did some development and quite a bit of writing for it, and I did the page layouts. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do all that, there's nothing more, there's no higher thing I can reach within Pendelhaven. So I love those guys, but I've got a bunch of systems of my own to publish. So I started Radio James Games, and Fight to Survive is the first of many systems to be published through the Radio James Games publishing house. And the book is by me. It's kind of auteur. I'm writing, developing, and doing the layout, but I've got a wonderful artist. I don't know if you can see in the background, it's one of the promotional images. A wonderful artist in Ian McLean, who's got credits like Call of Cthulhu and Pathfinder. I've got a great editor, and I, if it funds, I'll have a wonderful sensitivity reader. But otherwise, it's just Minerva sprouting from my forehead, and off it'll go. So the project is called Fight to Survive, role-playing martial arts meets heart. And the premise, my elevator pitch, is it's like Jean-Claude Van Damme's Bloodsport in Mouse Guard. There's my Luke Crane reference there. And it's a strange game. It's a strange little indie game. It's diceless. It uses a system of moves trumping moves in order to determine combat. It's kind of born out of 2 general ideas, which is martial arts is not very well emulated in tabletop role-playing games. It's either way too detailed, like Eric Wujcik's Ninjas and Super Spies, where you'd need to be a martial artist in order to understand what's going on, or it's way heavily abstracted as to be irrelevant because it's just a series of superpowers. So that consideration, and then the other consideration of I really wanted to bring out the heart of the kind of genre tropes. Like martial arts movies are often slagged for having a bad plots, but they're high emotion and they're really passionate things. And I wanted to be able to give mechanical relevance to things like a training montage with a straight face, not with making fun of the camp, but with a straight face. It's hard not to get jazzed when you watch Rocky IV. And he has a big training montage and then says hi to Adrian, and it does a big training montage. Most tabletop role-playing games deal with those as hand-wavy downtime activities. Let's bake that into the system, make it mechanically relevant, make it interesting. Similarly, the kind of emotional content of somebody going off on a drive on the beach to clear their head and because of the troubles that have been amassed in their violent lifestyle, let's make that mechanically relevant. Let's make that so that it means something within the system. Because if you don't make something mechanically relevant, nobody's going to play it. They don't use it. They skip over it and go to the part that's incentivized within the system. So those were the 2 considerations for Fight to Survive. Let's do martial arts in a way that is, kind of accurate. I'll use that word loosely because it's about verisimilitude and not about realism. In a way that you don't have to be a martial artist. People can pick it up intuitively. And let's feed into the genre and do a bunch of genre conventions and have that kind of emotional impact and quality baked into the game. So that has brought me to Fight to Survive, which launched on Kickstarter yesterday, March 24th. I don't know if that's yesterday for you because I don't know when this is airing, but here we go. And so it's now live. It's about
we're live, so it's
we're live.
It's
we're live.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
All right, live. So then right now it was yesterday,
Yeah.
and right now the Kickstarter is about half funded in 24 hours. So we've got 21 days of, I guess 20 days now, of hard hitting action and a bunch of stretch goal reveals and fun stuff. to go before the thing fully realizes and fully funds. And that will bring us to April 12th. I think the closing date is April 12th.
So
I'm
you don't have any randomizer mechanic.
Nothing is mechanically randomized, but you don't know what your opponent is capable of. So if you're coming into the fight and you know that you've trained up your punch and you've trained up your kick and you've trained up your footwork, which will be good for getting away, and you get to pick a bunch of moves and it's a call and response. You're like, I'm going to punch the guy. And then the guy's like, I'm going to kick. That beats punch. And you're like, okay, well, what beats a kick? These things beat a kick. All right, so I'm going to try kicking you back. And you've prepared these moves beforehand. Based on like the split-second decisions that you're making, like trying to meet your opponent. And then you compare and you're like, oh, well, my kick is better than yours because I put more technique into that kick. So it's going to trump that kick, and then you're out of moves and you're going to get hit. But you don't know what they're capable of. You can kind of make those guesses and make those assessments, and mechanically you can try and suss it out. And thematically you can try and suss it out. But there's a lot of mystery and a lot of tension and a lot of stakes to be had without dice entering into it. It's about a rules medium, I would say, game. It's not a minimalist game, but there are. I'll give you my spiel, Dave, on diceless games.
Okay.
Diceless games have a bad rap, and part of why they have a bad rap is their own fault, because a lot of them have mechanics that are very arbitrary. Like they feel very hand wavy. You're like, oh, if there's no dice, then there's no drama, right? Is a lot of how people feel. But if you are playing dicelessly right now, it's just the calls that you're making that you don't think involve a roll. You're still making those diceless calls all the time. And if you had a system for making those decisions in a clearer way, you'd need fewer and fewer dice rolls. And there comes a certain point at which the dice are actually interfering with what's going on. Because if you're supposed to be a super competent firefighter and you roll to get into a building to stop a fire and you accidentally fall on your axe, it can get frustrating. It can get frustrating in terms of trying to role play, in terms of emulating what's supposed to be going on. You suddenly, you're not the heroic fireman. Suddenly you're an idiot who trips on his axe. So it's not that I have anything against dice. I love dice. I've made games with dice. Absolutely. It's just, what are you trying to achieve in terms of genre emulation? And in some cases, dice are the right thing to do. And in some cases, like I mentioned the Fate of the Norn system earlier, they use runes. They pull runes from a bag because it's a Viking game, and that emulates that. This is a system of trumping moves because it creates the tension of you're entering into a fight. It's dangerous. You don't know what's going on. You think you got a good idea and you've got a battle plan. Let's see if it works. So the key here is that it's diceless, but it's not arbitrary. This is not hand-waving, like ambiguously defined structures. These are clear structures. You know what's going on and you know what the stakes are. Because if you don't know what the stakes are, you don't care. Trying to keep those stakes low and clear and understandable within the mechanics, that's the key to making something like this.
I can only really think of one other game that I know of that's diceless. And also, when I say that's diceless, but also doesn't have a randomizer, because there's other games that use cards or something else to kind of like randomize. You mentioned that, that game uses runes. So obviously there's still a randomizer in there. So the only one that I can think of off the top of my head is the Bounty Hunter game by How to Be a Great GM, which I'm a little embarrassed to admit I have not checked it out yet, even though he's a friend of mine. I'm going to guess that he probably gets it right too, but he was kind of challenged, and the reason why he made it because he was challenged by his business partner, who's not a gamer, to be like, I want to be able to play a game that's really easy and simple to get into, and doesn't require me to learn dice and random mechanics, so he had to come up with like a different resource.
Well, there's quite a few diceless games. I mean, probably the most notable one is the Ember diceless role-playing game by Eric Wujcik that came out in the 80s, where there's no dice or randomizer at all. But there's a bunch of them that don't have I'm separating out the ones that used cards as a randomizer, whether they're playing cards or tarot cards or whatever. But there are a few of them. But the criticism against them, which is fair, is that it's hard for the GM to know how to make a call, and you need to have a huge level of trust with that GM, because it's hard to not feel like the GM is playing favorites, or the GM is, because you don't have the dice to fall back on. One of the great things that dice do in a role-playing game is, as a GM, I'm like, I didn't kill you, the dice killed you. Like, you see what the number was, I rolled it. Like, it's if you don't have that, then you need a very strong structure in place to be able to make even if there's a high level of trust at the table. You need a strong structure in place to make people feel like these decisions are not arbitrary. There's steps that we took to get here, and this is a logical sequence. And I'm sorry, this is the result. Because everybody, like, you don't want a game where everything good happens. Like, there's no, well, I mean, you might, I guess, but I find that there's no tension in a game, or there's no adventure in a game where everything good happens. But you need to be able to excuse the horrible and arbitrary tragedies that happen through some kind of logical consistency, or players feel like that as a GM, you're just being mean to them.
that totally makes sense. And there's another part of that too, is just the simple fact that, like, just some players, maybe they're not as creative or as outgoing, so that system will heavily penalize them. Right?
Absolutely.
And for that.
And there's a big difference between testing the character and testing the player. And some systems do, well, most systems do both. And some systems lean one way and some systems lean the other way. But as a player, if you're like, I noticed that it's the super creative players that always want to lean towards the system that rewards their behavior. And a lot of diceless games are arbitrary like that. It's based on how much you can convince the GM to go along with your plan, right? And that's why we have initiative rules, or most games have initiative rules, is trying to balance out the shy folks at the table who don't necessarily aren't throwing themselves at the problem, and to give everybody more or less an equal weight in what's going on. So I lean towards looser kind of mechanical structures because I want to encourage people to be creative, but I have to understand that as a designer, I'm not designing for myself. I'm designing for a myriad of play styles, and need to accommodate people getting a spotlight and getting attention on them and being able to make relevant decisions, even if they're not being aggressive with their creativity.
So Brian Smith says Dread. Well, Dread doesn't really fall in that category because while it's not dice or cards, it still has a randomizer that just happens to rely on your manual dexterity, and maybe your ability to know which blocks to pull or not pull.
Well, instead of a randomizer, I mean, I'd say it has effectively a randomizer in that it's player skill that has nothing to do with in-game reinforcement that is determining how well you overcome challenges, right? Because you could be playing a clumsy orc, but if you're using Dread and you're really good at Jenga, right, then it disassociated from the character, you as a player are overcoming conflicts well. So that effectively works as the same rubric of being a randomizer, even if it's not random. Yeah, I could go on about game design. Sorry, but like that's
okay. It's kind of why we're here to talk about whatever comes up. So, are you a fan of just a fan of the genre, or are you also actually a practicing martial artist?
I mean, I've got a dad bod these days, especially during the pandemic. But I have been at different points in my life a practicing martial artist. I spent countless years fighting, and I do have a formal education in different soft style kung fu's and Lohan, different northern hard style kung fu's like Lohan Quan, Mizong Law Horn, and soft styles like Yingyi Quan, Baguazhang, and two different structures of Taiji Quan. So I've fought. I've lived that lifestyle. I'm a dad now, but so I've done that. I'm also a huge fan of martial arts movies, both big and small. Everything from like bargain bin straight to VHS stuff to big blockbuster stuff. I'm a big fan. I don't care if Jean-Claude Van Damme does not actually connect his kicks in Bloodsport. It's a lot of fun. And so I want to celebrate that, which sets up a kind of dichotomy within the structure of Fight to Survive. Because on one hand, actual fights are really grisly, right? Like they're ugly things, they're sickening things. People are always nervous and afraid and sick to their stomach, and it's very stressful. And especially if you're talking about street fights and not like an organized kind of
Yeah.
martial arts. And on the other hand, you know, Jean-Claude Van Damme is a lot of fun. And then I don't mean to single him out specifically, but like, you know, Charles Bronson's 1975 Hard Times, directed by Walter Hill, about a 1933 drifter going through, you know, New Orleans, beating up people in order to make a dollar and then move on. Like there's wonderful genre tropes at work here. All of the Shaw Brothers kung fu films from like the 70s throughout the early to mid 80s, the Golden Harvest films of the 80s. Like these are fantastic genre tropes that I wanted to mine into being a game in a relevant way and focus on things that don't normally get attention or mechanical reinforcement in a tabletop role-playing game.
So what do you do in the game? Obviously you're fighting, but is that it? Or is there
Oh,
a
no,
narrative?
no.
Is there stories?
There's a few tabletop role-playing games out there for representing a fighting game, like basically doing Street Fighter 2. And you there's nothing to do in them other than to get together and fight. And I don't want to knock that because like that's some people's jam. That's awesome. I love Street Fighter 2 as well. I was an arcade champion in the early 90s. Like I love it, but this is not like that. This is a little more down to earth. It's a little more mundane. So Dave, you as a character would have a number of different, well, actually, let's back up slightly. You've got a hardship track as well as a health track, right? And it's a little bit more complicated than just being hit points, but let's just waive that for now. So you've got basically these two tracks that if they fill up, you're out of the game. So if your harm track fills up too much, you know, you die or you're dismembered or whatever. If your hardship track fills up too much, then you quit. You're like, I don't want to lead this violent lifestyle anymore. I'm out of the game. I don't want to pursue this. You leave the city. In order to prevent and everything that happens to you that's bad, you add a hardship. So like, oh, your dog died, put a hardship down. Oh, you're late for work, put a hardship down. Oh, you like this, that, and everything else is happening, you put a hardship down. The only thing preventing that hardship from filling up completely and you leaving the game are your comforts, the people, places, and things that you care about. So you might care about your daughter, Jenny, you know, and as your person, and your place might be the Strike First bowling alley, and your thing might be your grandfather's pocket watch or whatever. And each of those have a numerical value. And so you go into scenes where you employ those comforts to reduce your hardship. Well, like I'm going to go for a day at the park with my daughter, Jenny, and I've got a 3 in her. So that reduces my hardship by 3. So you're getting into fights, which is increasing the damage that you're taking and your hardship. And then you've got to deal with that hardship in order to keep participating in this lifestyle or leave it. Now, that sounds like that should be simple enough, but whatever you write down as a comfort is what's on the chopping block for the GM. Every session, the GM presents a comfort that is under threat. Be like, oh, Jenny's been kidnapped. So Jenny's kidnapped. You've got a 3 in your daughter, Jenny. If you don't get Jenny back, then you're getting 3 more hardship, and that might be enough to kick you out of the game, like to retire your character. So you need to go rescue Jenny. Or, oh, the Strike's First bowling alley is on fire. Or, oh, the, you know, I don't forget what did I say, pocket watch? Your pocket watch has been stolen by a scallywag pickpocket, and so you'll need to get it back. So the drive to action is based on you trying to save these comforts. The game is multi-generational. It's I don't know if you ever played Greg Stafford's King Arthur Pendragon, but a lot of it, that structure is based on that, which is every game session is between 1 and 3 years, roughly speaking. So it takes place over the whole of the 20th century. Like a lot of my art and stuff is based on the 80s because I love it, but you know, it's anywhere in the 20th century. So you might have this session is 1952 and Jenny has been kidnapped by the local River City gang because of reasons. And so you need to go hunt them down in order to maintain your sanity and your stress, basically. But you're participating in this violent lifestyle that is feeding into it. So it's an impetus to get you into combat, but it makes the drama and the structure of what you're doing relevant. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it very much makes me think of Chuck Norris movies and Jean-Claude Van Damme movies where
exactly
all these problems that pop up around what the actual competition or fight, or or the other side is actively trying to put those conflicts in there so make it harder for them to fight or make them completely back down.
Yeah, and it could, like, if you get clever players, depending on what kind of, I shouldn't say clever, because it's depending on what your players care about. You could have more or you could have less fighting. I've run sessions with no fighting at all because people wanted to avoid the fights because they're like, crap, we can't take on it's 1975 and this particular Chinese Tong group that survived the Tong Wars of the early 20th century has some very proficient martial artists, and we don't really want to tangle with them, but we've got to make a deal with them over something, and we're going to avoid fighting because fighting is tough, and it has really real effects in the game in terms of injury. Like, you can pretty easily get injured and then be like, my arm never healed properly from that fight I got into with a Chinese mercenary in 1974. And like, it's 2000, it's 1980 now, and I think I have to retire from the fight game and pass my character on to my student. So it's multi-generational. You can pass on your character, pass on certain aspects of your character to a new character, and then get to continue living in that world because you share comforts. Like, Jenny might be your daughter, but for another player character in the group, what's driving them, they might be completely different from you. You might be learning boxing, but they might be like doing karate or something. Yeah. But Jenny might be your daughter, but they might be Jenny's boyfriend, right? Or they might be, and so there's connections, and you end up with like a really woven kind of narrative structure just by virtue of playing. And the more you play, because that's the other problem, is that a lot of fighting game role-playing games are really only good for one-offs. This is best for like long-term play. The longer you play, the more interesting it becomes because you have a history. You know that, oh yeah, Jenny, she was kidnapped in 52, but we managed to get her back, and then she got into that drug problem in the 60s, but we got her out of it. And the Strikes First bowling alley, it may have burned down in 1962, but we built a new Strikes First in its place, and Gary, he's been running it since then. And so you have a structure.
There's
like
a narrative.
There's a narrative. I hesitate to use the word story because I think story is kind of often misattributed in cases like this. But just like you have a feeling in many role-playing games of having a shared history of like, we're a party, we're a GM, we've been through this together. Our characters have been through this together. That grows as from strong roots in Fight to Survive, because it's not enough to have a fighting mechanic. You have to have a reason to fight, and you have to have a context for fighting. You have to feel passionately about the need to do it or not to do it. You have to have motivation, and you have to have stakes, or it's no good.
There's like a huge difference between westernized martial arts that have point systems or even kung fu systems that rely on playing compared to like full contact combat compared to an actual street fight. Where are we at in Fight to Survive?
We can do all of them. I mean, we can you can easily do a Karate Kid or a Cobra Kai, right? I think if you've seen Cobra Kai, I think Cobra Kai is a really good example because some of it is like violent street fighting, but not too rough. And some of it is like tournament competition, but there's also a lot of character motivation and character scenes woven in between, giving context to those fights within Cobra Kai. Another really good example is Cinemax's The Warrior. It's a TV show about like the early 20th century. There's a lot of fights, some particularly brutal fights. There's no competition fights. It's street fights typically, but there's a lot of motivation, a lot of character context feeding into what is going on. So if you want to run a tournament with it, you can absolutely run a tournament with it. You just go, there are rules for it. You just go to first hit. But if you want to be in the streets, then things get a lot bloodier and it gets a lot more aggressive. And it's built for that. We're largely thinking of, back alley, tripping over the trash can kind of stuff. But you can certainly, and I've done it, run like blood sport, like tournaments, kumites, versus like your Lionheart, Jean-Claude Van Damme kind of like fighting in the pool, fighting an empty pool kind of stuff. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Brian is a great question. Fighting games are only as good as their bad guys. Any mechanics or design around making cool boss guys or rivals?
Well, history is the best teacher. I mean, definitely the game is going to come swamped with stock fighters, right? Like you'll have dozens of them detailing many, many years and a rubric whereby it's really easy to create them. But I always suggest people mining history. Like, for instance, I don't know if you've ever heard of the story of Count Dante. Count Dante was named was a real person in the. He mostly fought through the 1960s and 70s. He was a karate guy. His real name was John Kean, and he was a red-haired, wiry Irishman. But he had his name changed to Count Dante, and insisted that he was descended from Spanish royalty, I think. He put out advertisements in Marvel Comics in Spider-Man to say that he was the deadliest man alive, and he knew the dim mock poison fist touch. And for only $3.99, you could mail away and get all of his secrets. His actual life was truly bizarre. He had a pet lion, and he was a hairdresser at the Playboy Mansion. I'm not making any of this stuff up. You can look it all up. And he founded the Black Dragon Fighting Society, which got into dojo wars in the 1970s that got so bloody that one man lost an eye and another man died. He was arrested for trying to set a bomb at a rival judo studio and ended up dying mysteriously after a bank heist. So I suggest people look to history if they need any inspiration. Count Dante is probably one of the most colorful characters in martial arts, but like Frank Dukes, Robert Trias, there's a dozens of references to them. There will be lots of exciting characters featured in the game. If you go to the Kickstarter, you've got 5 characters lined up on the Kickstarter page just as examples with their little profiles of what kind of colorful and interesting characters you can generate. I wanted to not emphasize them too much because the most important characters are the characters that you make as players. Those are the star characters. And I wanted to make sure that there was a structure whereby the kind of meta narrative or superstructure is not more important than what you're creating at the table. I have a lot of fun running it because I want to know what my players are going to do. Because there's so much influence on the world that like, what are you guys going to do? Where's this going to go? Like, it's up to you. I just presented the hook. Like, the little girl's been kidnapped, but like, what's going to happen? And then other people can run with it because the characters you make are more important than anything. But there are lots and lots of opponents. And one of the kind of, I guess, weaknesses of the system is that you need to come up with opponents. And that's most of the prep is like, oh, okay, he's huge and he's muscly and his name is Handlebars and he's a pro wrestler and he's got like a +5 to his grapple and a +2 to block, go. You can, there's a kind of a sliding scale of how much detail you want to put into things. The game is easy to run in terms of opponents because there's a few clever things in it. Like if instead of fighting Handlebars, the pro wrestler, you want to fight like you want them to fight like a whole bunch of wrestlers all at once, be like group of wrestlers. They got +2 to crowd you and +3 to gang up on you or whatever. And
so like mob rules kind of.
Exactly. So like in Fist of Fury, when Bruce Lee walks into the Japanese dojo and takes on like, the whole Japanese dojo, you run the group as one character and then you'd run the guy with the sword standing off to the side, not doing anything as another character. Right. So it makes it easy to run. And there's mechanical reinforcement that makes it easy because I can only keep track of so much stuff in my brain. I don't know about you guys, but like, I want clear direction when I'm running something and I want to be able to conceptualize something well. I don't want to feel like I'm writing an SAT to try and run a game. So,
yeah, no, I really appreciate that in design because it is far more interesting. And, and also like, even like if you're playing another game where maybe there's a bunch of characters and then they have an entourage of NPCs with them.
Yeah.
And like the last thing I ever want to do is roll dice against myself, or whatever the mechanic is, right? I'm like, here's the DM. They're going to go off to the side and play with themselves for the next 30 minutes. I generally won't do that. I fade to black, or I will make a rule if the game doesn't have one for those characters to be involved. But so it's not like me directly having to do something and doesn't take away from what the players are doing.
Yeah, I don't want to trash anybody's game design, but like if you need to hack it, then it's probably not tight enough design. Like if you need to home rule it. I understand that like as a design, I'm speaking as a designer, so you take that with a grain of salt, but like I understand that at the table, people are just going to play the way they're going to play, but you need to play test to crap. Like you need months and months and months and months of play testing to find out how people will actually play. And then those are your rules. It doesn't matter what you've got written down. And if you need to hack it, that means probably that not enough play testing took place. Right.
Well, there's another side to that too. Like I think like D&D is a good example where they probably just expect you to do all the extra math and all the extra rolling for those NPCs, and I just don't have any value for that. So like
Yeah.
in that case, I don't think it's a design flaw. I don't. It's not a bug. It's a feature, right? It's just a
Well,
feature that
yeah.
I'm not really interested in.
I mean, D&D has a lot of um, has a big history with development, right? Because the
Yeah.
fact is, even from the beginning, people were playing D&D differently. And with successive editions, you don't really want to cut off your customer base and say that part of it has been playing wrong all these years. Like, because if you've been playing a game wrong for 20 years, are you really? Or is it a new game now? So D&D is like, even with every successive edition where they've tried to kind of recapitulate their rule structure, they don't want to cut off a player base. And so a lot of legacy content remains in Dungeons and Dragons that is with the understanding that people are still going to play the way they want to play. And I think that's probably the smartest thing they could have done with Dungeons and Dragons. But when we're talking about new games, I'm of the opinion, and again, this is coming as a developer, that there's a lot of untapped stuff in tabletop role-playing games. There is a lot of even just genre emulation, which is cheating a little bit. There's a lot of new stuff to do. And I love other games. You know, I'm still playing D&D, but I'm very passionate about let's do new things. Let's have new experiences, and let's build new mechanics to support those new experiences, because you do in a game whatever you're mechanically reinforced to do. And I don't believe in reskinning one system to fit every kind of anything you want to do, because it's still going to play like that one system. Like taking D&D as an example, even within editions of D&D, if you're giving experience for gold, people are going to go after gold. If you're giving experience for kills, people are going to kill things. Like whatever's mechanically reinforced. So I'm passionate about new systems, new approaches to systems to try and bring you down new paths and give you new experiences. And that's why Fight to Survive exists, is because like I didn't think that there's not a system that would satisfy my desire as a player to play something like this. So I needed to make it.
Did you do any kind of like market testing beforehand, or is this the market testing to see if there's, if there's a want for the style of game?
No, this is a complete game. This has been at conventions since 2015. It has been gone through several rungs of regular playtest groups and blind playtest groups in order to arrive at the rule set that it is. I wouldn't like I've done Kickstarters before. I've done role-playing game development before. I wouldn't want to bring a game to market unless I was very confident that like, no, this is the game. Like it's a complete game. It's a good game. I'm not bringing something to Kickstarter to say, oh, it might work. I can work with you and develop it. No, it's she's done and she's good. And I believe in it. And it's been preposterously rigorously play tested and vetted. Probably like I ran it at I'm even running it at two conventions this weekend. I'm running it at Terminal City convention in Vancouver remotely, because that's an online convention, and I'm running it at GaryCon in Indianapolis in online as well. So that's tomorrow and the next day. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it started already.
Okay. Oh yeah, GaryCon has started, but my game isn't until Sunday.
Oh, okay. Do you have any spots open?
I don't know. I haven't looked lately. Honestly, I've been so busy with because the Kickstarter launched yesterday, right? Yeah. So I've just been aggressively marketing that the Kickstarter launch, because the first 24 hours are so vital. And thank goodness we got just about half of our budget within 24 hours, which is a good sign. It means it'll fund. Yeah, I've just been occupied in that space.
Where do you want to go after Survive the Fight is a thing and done? Because you mentioned you want to do other games as well.
Well, I should preface and say Fight to Survive is a living game. This is a full, complete core rulebook. It's everything you need to play for years and years, but there's a lot more planned for the line. There's a lot of expansion books in different places we could go. For instance, I could spend a whole book just talking about old kung fu movies and like working in that kung fu space.
Yeah.
Because they're so good and there's so many of them and there's such a rich content from Shaw Brothers Kung Fu movies and Golden Harvest. So I'd love to do more deep dive expansion books. There's adventure modules planned because I have a history of writing adventure modules for games. And so there's a whole line. We'll see if we reach them in terms of stretch goals. I haven't revealed the stretch goals for the project yet, but a lot of them are that. And after this, there's a lot of stuff. I've got a space opera game, and I've got a pulp game, and I've got a giant robot fighting game. Like there's a bunch of developed systems. It's just this is the one. I'll be honest with you, Dave. Like Fight to Survive is a bit of a hard sell because it's a niche game. It's of niche content, and it has niche mechanics. Like it is. I am making this as hard on myself as I possibly can to get this weird little game out into finding its audience. But I think it has an audience to find, and there are lots of people who are passionate and want a game like this. So it's just a case of reaching them.
I think it reminds me a little bit of the top I think it was Top Secret's martial arts system, unarmed fighting system. I mean, obviously what you've done is far more in depth, and that had some dice things to it. But I think there was like a chart where there was matching up for moves. Unless I'm confusing it with another game that I played like in the 80s.
I mean, I don't remember Top Secret very well. I know that Mouse Guard is a good example of having a trumping system, and it isn't developed in the same way. Burning Wheel and Burning Empires also like uses the similar structure because it's an adapted system. There are a few games that have like similar mechanics. Like I'm not saying this game is revolutionary. Like it borrows a lot of elements from a lot of different things to bring it into a sphere where it feels complete. But if you want to pick it apart, there's things that are very similar to Blades in the Dark. There's things that are very similar to Mouse Guard. There's things that are very similar to like, I don't know, Robot Rally, the board game. There's things that like it's bringing all these influences together in a way that's going to be genre emulating, that's going to work in terms of this is the kind of game we want to play.
Yeah, I don't say that to be detracting. I say because as you talk, it's like things that are popping into my head.
Yeah, of course.
And it makes me think of even like Brian had mentioned, rock, paper, scissors earlier on, and the system makes me think a lot of like that. It's just a more advanced rock, paper scissors because there's set parameters and you don't know what your opponent's going to do. How many different options are there?
Every character has 5 different base combat techniques. It was based in the notion of a Bruce Lee quote that said, I'm going to paraphrase it, but unless a human being has 6 arms and 6 legs, he fights like a human. Yeah. So you have grapple, punch, kick, block, and footwork. 2 of them, block and footwork, are defensive. They're not going to do any damage if they connect. And grapple, punch, and kick they form a kind of triangle with each other. So this is based on a few kind of underlining premises that it has to be a shorthand. It has to be able to hit the Venn diagram between easy to play and make sense, right? So there's compromises on both sides effectively. But basically kick beats punch and grapple beats kick and kick beats punch. Yeah, kick beats punch and grapple beats kick and punch beats grapple. So that's like the triangle going around. And then footwork, you can footwork your way out of a kick and you can block your way out of a punch, et cetera, et cetera. So like it's pretty straightforward and it becomes intuitive. And it only really takes one con game for people to be like, oh yeah, I know how to play completely. Because I wanted it to be like, in order for there to be a higher level of strategy in the structure of like, okay, I'm fighting a kickboxer. So he's going to kick. So I know that I want to do a bunch of grapples because grapples are going to beat kicks. But if he knows that I want to do a bunch of grapples, he's going to prepare a bunch of punches. So how am I going to so it becomes a mental game, right? Which if we want to bring it back to Street Fighter 2, this is less ridiculous than something like Street Fighter 2 because there's no fireballs and things. I love Street Fighter 2, but like it's scaled back.
Oh, you lost me. No fireballs, I'm out.
At higher levels, Street Fighter 2 becomes a kind of mental game, right? Because you know what your opponent is capable of and you know what you're capable of, and it's about making those choices. So I wanted to have a game that was like both intuitive and simple to execute. Be like, yeah, I'm just going to punch, kick, whatever. And could exist at that higher level of making strategically relevant or tactically relevant rather choices about combat.
Do you get to a point where you get like special moves and kind of develop, kind of like the less mystical Street Fighter type things?
Hey, did I feed you questions? Are you reading off the? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, you do. Like high level play, so to speak. As you get older as a character, your body starts to break down, and you're not taking the hits as well. But the things that you learn can go higher and higher in terms of what you're inheriting from your martial lineage, what you're learning from your teacher, and special moves are kind of the height of that. There's lots of examples of special moves in history. Wang Feihong is a good example. He had a shadowless kick that has been represented in cinema several times as to what exactly that means. So there's a special move structure in the game that complements the 5 moves. It's interesting. It works out. And then when you pass your character down, one of the options is to show them like I can teach you no more. This is the final lesson. This is my special move, and then you can carry on your special moves through the martial lineage.
How long before you can do the Jet Li kick? The one where like he completely defies gravity and he kicks with one leg, then kicks with the other leg, and you're like, there are no legs on the ground, and then he puts them both back down, and I don't even understand it, having seen it multiple times.
Well, you've got kind of 2 options for developing special moves in the game, or for getting special moves as a character. One is you find a really cool teacher who knows these things, and you convince them to teach you. And that might take years of adding into that comfort of your teacher so that they like you more, so they eventually teach you. And then the other one is that you take a whole lot of hardship and isolate yourself for a period of time and develop it yourself. Which there's criteria for doing that. So you can do it, solo by like meditating on a mountain or whatever, or just, in your apartment, or you can do it through inheriting it from somebody who knows more than you do. So how long does it take? I mean, if you're really specifically narrowly focused on doing that, you could probably do that in 2 or 3 sessions. Well, I don't even know if you could do that fast, but yeah, it's possible, right? Like, I think, no, you probably have to be on like at least session 4 or 5 before you could develop a special move. If that was your singular purpose, but it happens during play. It doesn't happen to every character, and when it does happen, you treat it preciously and you pass it down through your martial lineage so that your successive characters have that edge of like, oh yeah, I've got the dim mak poison fist technique. Because like I talk about realism or verisimilitude or feeling like you're in a fight, but there's also the fun of, Jean-Claude Van Damme breaking the bricks, the bottom brick exploding, and trying to marry those 2 concepts. They're sometimes in conflict, but ultimately everybody's up for having fun, right? And let's have fun. Let's play in this genre. Let's do things that we couldn't do before with role-playing games.
And I also too, like even like within the genre and kind of even the real world, sometimes you'll see something you've never seen before, and before seeing it, you would have thought that not possible.
It's true.
Like the Jet Li kick that I did, I don't even know that I fully describe it, but anyone that's seen him do it is like, how? Like that defies physics, and there's definitely things like that. Like also like a buddy of mine teaches martial arts, and his teacher that he works with has a standing chokeout challenge. He lets anyone try and choke him out, and no one's been able to do it yet. It's not mysticism magic. It's just some technique that he knows that other people don't. But he's had judo masters try and choke him out, and none have done it yet. So,
well, we'll keep trying.
That's what I say. I have a couple of friends that are into that kind of stuff, and I feel as their friend, it's my job to try and get them into death matches whenever possible.
Oh yeah, whenever possible, a death match, right?
Yeah.
That's how you do it.
I mean, if you don't, are you really a friend?
Yeah, your friends go into death matches for friends, right? Yeah. Like that's how it goes. But if you're not comfortable with that, there is Fight to Survive on Kickstarter now, where you can send your friends into death matches and have it be consequence free, relatively speaking.
So Brian wants to know, speaking of a new mechanics, what does an epic duel in a grassy field like mechanically in Fight to Survive?
What does it look like mechanically? Well, an epic duel in a grassy fight, like the beginning of Street Fighter Alpha. You have the grassy terrain places come into play mostly for training and the structure of training mechanics and what a grassy location would do to give you training bonuses for training in different techniques for the moves. They don't come into play as much for within a fight unless somebody wants to take advantage of their environment and say, like, I'm going to grab a bottle off the counter and smash somebody over the head with it, or I want to grab a chair and throw it across the room, or like, because those things are relevant within the structure of a fight. It's not like you get sucked into some kind of blank void when a fight happens. Like, there's a lot of circumstance that happens with, oh, you're cornered, or there's a blind alley, or whatever else. In a grassy field, there's very few variables. You just have a grassy field, like, and things are blowing in the wind, and there's probably a big moon in the sky, and there may be one tree, but it's, out of the way. So there's not a lot of variables that somebody could take advantage of in order to get more moves. Because typically speaking, when you're entering a round, you have to come up with 3 moves. I'm like, Dave, okay, you're facing the karate dude, Terry Saito, with an eye patch, and he's wearing a karate gi, and he's a Japanese karate assassin. You're facing him in a grassy field at midnight, even though it's actually a really bright midnight because the moon is really bright. So come up with 3 moves for me, and he's got 3 moves too, because you both know that you've challenged each other. There's an initiative structure based on size, the size of your person. So if you're smaller, you're faster, and if you're bigger, you're slower. But if you're bigger, you hit harder. And there's 5 builds. So I'd be like, okay, Dave, how big is your character? Oh, you're thin. Okay, that means you're faster than Terry Saito, who's got, like, huge bulging muscles. So knowing that you're going to be faster, you're going to have a more of a reaction time than this big guy, can affect your tactics in terms of what moves you're going to trump what moves. We'll say, hey, Dave, come up with your 3 moves, keep them a secret. You can repeat your moves, but you probably want to focus on what you anticipate he can do. So he's a karate guy, so he's going to have a pretty good block, because karate gets a bonus to training block. I'm simplifying the martial arts aspect here a little bit, because there's 5 basic martial arts that are presented for the game, but there's actually more than 50 in the game. It's just trying to present that first stage of, like, you don't need to know martial arts. We can just we present some basic options for you. So thinking about karate and Terry Saito, he's going to have a good block, and that your grapple overcomes block. So you got to think, do you have a good grapple? Is he going to be prepared for that? Is he going to try and trounce it? So there's a mental game without too much delay, and you come up with 3 moves, and then that he's going to have to go first because he's bigger, because you can react faster. So he'll say throw out a punch. And you'd be like, okay, well, I'm going to look at my moves. What have I got? I chose a block. Okay, I'm going to block. So that blocks the punch. So, like, he's punching. Obviously, there's more description going on here. Like, Terry Saito tears across the grassy field, ripping grass behind him with his dashing lunge, and squares a level-headed straight punch through your, like, aim towards your heart. And you're like, what do you do? And you're like, oh God, well, I block. I'm like, block. Okay, you block. So he comes up with his next move is he twists his hips and issues a powerful leg up into the sky to descend an axe kick down on the crown of your head. And you look at your moves and you're like, what beats kick? Crap, what beats kick? Okay, well, and then you pick one of your other moves and see if it resolves. Skipping ahead, when you've run out of moves and he's run out of moves, you see whatever's left, and then a hit is issued. You can issue a hit in the middle of a combat as well. So if he has the axe kick coming down on my head, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to punch it. Well, kick beats punch. So you try to punch up at him, but it doesn't work, and he smashes the heel of his foot down upon your head and does X amount of damage. Usually 1, but like if he's got more training in something, that it can be more than that. And then that's what a game typically, like a match typically looks like. All matches are best 2 out of 3 rounds. Because it doesn't matter if it's a like street fight, if it's a grassy fight, or if like it's happening in a formal tournament structure, because we need to be quick and snappy, and the game needs to be able to keep moving. And if you're not participating in the fight, there's only so much you want to sit there and watch, right? So best 2 out of 3, the game resolves, or the match resolves, and then based on the structure of it, we figure out who won or who lost. Like if Terry Saito is the one who challenged you and he failed to defeat you, then he lost. Like if he failed to do damage, and we figured according to that. Does that make sense? Like, I know that's a mechanically heavy kind of test case, but like that's what a fight in a grassy field under the system would look like.
So basically, you have a move pool every round.
Yep, that you decide on.
And the faster person has the advantage of seeing the moves ahead of, or
Yeah, well, you react faster. See, I don't want to get too deep into martial philosophy, but between two fighters of equal skill, the person who moves first is at a disadvantage because once they've committed to an action, it's easier to counter that action. So the premise is if you're bigger, you move first because you're moving, like everything's happening kind of at the same time, but you're unable to react. So the faster person then chooses the response because knowing what trumps what, choosing the response is a tremendous advantage. Because if you're going to punch me and I'm faster than you, I'm like, well, obviously I kick him so that he doesn't get a chance to punch me. I've just intercepted the kick or intercepted his face with a kick, right? But the advantage of being bigger is that you hit harder. You're doing more than 1 damage. You're doing 2 damage or you're doing 3 damage. And then that's like the equivalent of being hit twice, right? 3 times. So it's where you want to lie on that scale of like being big and doing a lot of damage or being small and being really fast and making that rich and relevant so that we're not all just talking about, vanilla cardboard pieces.
I mean, I know that there's definitely different philosophies there. Like my buddy who teaches, I know his philosophy. Once he knows that he knows that we've gone beyond the point of there being any other way of resolving this, he always hits first.
Absolutely, yeah. And there are mechanics for that. It's called the first swing, and it's because typically you're choosing 3 moves. You can get an extra move if you strike first and hard. Because like I know a lot of people who that's their philosophy for fights is like you strike first, you strike hard, you overwhelm them. And that is a completely legitimate approach to a fight. And that's the equivalent of getting a 4th move versus the other guy's 3 moves. Right. And that's also how being outnumbered is ruled. Like, you're one guy fighting a whole bunch of guys, they get more moves. So then we're comparing the moves differently, or if you're grossly outnumbered. And that can work. It's just the problem is with a first strike scenario is you have to set it up. If people are not really sure they're going to get into a fight or there's still a chance of resolving it, or if you can surprise somebody or if you ambush them, then yeah, you get the extra move and that can have a huge impact. And if you set up circumstance upon circumstance, you can get more and more moves. It doesn't mean you're necessarily going to prevail, but it can mean that you do a tremendous amount of harm to them. So like you either surprise somebody with a glass to the back of the head or you don't. So yeah, it's but if you've got 2 fighters meeting in a grassy field, then the assumption under which they're operating is that they know they're going to fight. And if they know they're going to fight and they're both in anticipation of the fact that they're going to be striking, then all things being equal, it's the response that governs speed rather than the initiative to strike first.
Yeah, that also might be a very, very good description for a street fight versus a match, if you will.
Exactly. So if you decide you're going to fight somebody and like you're in a bar and you decided to take it outside and you're taking it outside, and somebody's in the middle of taking off their jacket and you punch them in the stomach. Even though you knew that there was a fight coming, that becomes a surprise, and that effectively within the game is treated as you just stole an extra move. And then you've got the moves that you've got the 3 banked up and they've got only 3 to respond, which shifts the probability quite a lot in terms of how you can overcome that trumping move circumstance. There was a lot of consideration given to that, the different approaches to combat and how people can approach combat, because my focus was I wanted to make sure that this was intuitive. Like without an understanding of martial philosophy, you should be able to approach it in a way that it makes sense without the words that you're necessarily able to describe. So I wanted to be able to reward people for doing what makes sense to them in terms of a fight. Like the fighting is only half the game, right? There's the whole aspect of comforts and context and whatever. But I felt like the fighting needs to be really rich in terms of you're in a bar, there's pool tables all around you. I want people to be able to say, I grabbed the pool ball and smash it over the guy's head when he turns. Like it's not nice, but players are going to say things like that, right? Or like, I grab the guy and I hold him up by his collar because I want to intimidate him. Like, well, you've committed to a grapple. You're effectively in a grapple. So
are there rules for fighting while you're intoxicated?
Absolutely, of course. How else can we have 8 drunken immortals boxing?
Okay.
Alcohol is a much celebrated aspect of martial arts going back thousands of years here, Dave.
I'm just thinking when you described the bar scene,
Yeah.
it just makes me think of the Kickboxer movie.
Well, I'm just thinking of like Roadhouse or Best of
Uh,
the Best, or like a Kickboxer is a really good example. Like there's so many. The bar scene is a staple of the martial arts film genre. And when I frame the martial arts film genre, I'm talking about like the American martial arts film from roughly the mid 70s to roughly the mid 90s. But I'm
yeah.
also talking about Western like important films throughout the 20th century, or Eastern important films throughout the 20th century, coming from Hong Kong specifically more than anything. But these are all integrated into the whole because they really did feed on each other, right? Like Bloodsport's a really good example. It's written by a white guy about a white guy going to Hong Kong, kind of. Maybe he meant to Jamaica. You need to look into Frank Dukes.
Yeah.
But it's also like, so it's kind of about something happening in Hong Kong, but it's a mess of influences. But it's also produced by like I think an Armenian guy,
Yeah.
about his perspective of what America must be like.
Yeah.
Right? So it's the conclave of influences match. I think they go together and they can work together, and they work together under this game. I think I'm babbling now, Dave. I know
Oh,
I
it
can talk about
happens.
this. I know I can talk about this forever, but like yeah.
What so Brian Smith wants to know what kind can you fight dirty? Pocket sand in
Absolutely.
the eyes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd hate to keep bringing up the same thing, but like in Bloodsport, when Chong Li takes the little pellet out of his pouch and throws it in Jean-Claude Van Damme's eyes so he gets blinded, like I had to make some kind of mechanical reinforcement for that.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
when you fight dirty, it adds moves onto what you're available. Is that somebody else has got to deal with more moves against your moves, and it's totally relevant to set that up beforehand. And boy, howdy, do players get schemy.
Yeah, for sure. Players are
So
going to play. That's what they do.
players gonna play.
One of the things I wanted to ask before we head on out is what about the group mechanic? Like, I feel like RPGs in general, they're a group game, and there tends to be like 4 or 5 players at the table most of the time. How do you get everyone involved? Where this is a very like one-on-one kind of thing. A lot of times when you're talking about tournaments.
Mm-hmm. Well, for one, is I keep the fights short. Like the fights are brief and they resolve quickly, and it's regimented so that it's just a few exchange of blows that resolves it, so that everybody feels engaged. Secondly, and you're going to have to bear with me, Dave, on this one because it'll make sense, but it might not make sense at first. The only way to increase your abilities in the game, like to increase the technique of your moves, which is how it breaks ties in the move versus move comparison. Like if I'm punching and I'm going to punch you, well, who has the higher technique is who's going to get through. In order to increase the technique and in order to increase the force, so like you're doing more than one tick of damage, you need to train. The only way to train is to get training points so that you can then convert them into technique or force. The only way to get training points, there are a few ways, but generally speaking, this is the biggest way, is to have a fight going on in front of you, but not participate in it. And the reason is because one, it feeds into the genre convention of it's pretty rare in a martial arts movie that all the martial arts martial artists are fighting at the same time. Two, in terms of martial philosophy, when you're getting into a fight, you're not learning anything. You better have already learned it because the heat is on. Like this is your moment of decision making. And three, you can't get very far in the martial arts without studying people's technique and learning how to read people. So having the advantage of being like, oh, my buddy's in a bar fight, I'm just going to finish my drink, is a pretty big advantage to studying the situation and knowing what's going on. You take those training points and then you can then go off and train later. So it incentivizes people not participating in the fight so that there's rewards both way. So whenever there's a fight happening, you have to figure out as a player and as a character, are you going to get involved in this? Is it worth getting involved in this? Or is it worth sitting back and developing yourself? So if you're the kind of fighter or kind of player who wants to play a character who's always getting into every fight, you're going to end up badly beaten and injured, and you're not going to have learned anything. So you need to approach something more as a martial artist and be able to have a varied perspective on it. I know that is counterintuitive at first as a mechanic. The fighting game rewards you for not fighting, but it makes sense in the narrative and it makes sense in terms of player dynamics. You can have 5 people around the table throughout the course of a game, you might have all 5 of those people in a fight, or you might have only one of these people in a fight, or you might have 2 of those people in a fight, like 2 against a whole bunch, and then you might have one-on-one over here. But I wanted to make sure that it was easy to run, so that you wasn't a whole bunch of juggling. Like you weren't like, oh God, let me check my checklist, my initiative checklist, and have this guy gone yet? Oh no. I wanted it to be easy. I wanted it to be seamless, so that it kept the tempo of the game going, kept the energy up, because the energy is the most important part. I think it's the most important part of running a game. And I wanted to make sure that the energy could be kept up and fight to survive without any rule sacrifices. Everything makes sense. You get to run it. Energy keeps going.
You have the comforts, and what's the name of the other track that's not the harm track?
Hardship.
The hardship track. Like that makes a lot of sense to me, because you'll see in these movies where like the people that are watching are affected by who's fighting and vice versa. So I could definitely see your companions being part of your hardship and your comforts, and and feeding those as well. Does that play into the game? Where,
absolutely. Well, let's take another blood sport example, right?
Yeah.
Frank Dukes, Jean-Claude Van Damme, is sitting in the audience. He's watching Jackson, the big guy, fighting Chong Li, and he has an emotional reaction to Jackson being injured. He's like, no! So he would be taking on a hardship, right? Yeah. And then Jackson loses, and what does Chong Li do? He steals his bandana. His bandana is his comfort. So for losing, the penalty is that he just lost his comfort, or had his comfort harmed or destroyed. And what's the final resolution of the film is that comfort that is under threat, Jean-Claude Van Damme gets back for Jackson from Chong Li, who's then defeated, right? So mechanically, it's easy to fill in seamlessly, like without planning. It's easy to fill in those kinds of emotional structures of like taking a hardship and like having a hard time, and like your girlfriend news reporter is yelling at you about the violent lifestyle you lead, like, and making that relevant in the game and relevant to the action.
Nice. We are just past the hour mark, and I want to respect your time here, so we're going to wrap things up. Final thoughts before we head on out?
Final thoughts. I'm sorry my green screen was malfunctioning. I don't know what the deal was. Bad lighting in here, I guess. But final thoughts are, it's a strange little game. It's niche content of niche. Like it's got strange mechanics, and it's got a strange setting, but it works. It's passionate. It has heart. It emulates the martial arts in an interesting and mechanically relevant way. I think it's really cool, and I just want to connect it to its audience and get people out there. So the Kickstarter is on now. It's just under half funded, and you can be a part of it too.
Yeah, as always, folks, links are in the description, so go check them out. And until next time, stay